City Center Radio. It is episode 274, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, July 12th, 2024. Another Friday is here, and I hope you have had a great week. And if you need to make sure that your weekend is just as great, be sure to go to holycitycenter.com/calendar to find out what is going on in town, not just Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but any time going forward. There's always something going on in the Charleston area. It's always the best idea to go to that calendar. So holycitycenter.com/calendar. Before we get into the latest news, just a quick update. Not much going on here. Been busy working, of course, as always. My parents are now officially in town. I know in the last episode I mentioned they'd be visiting. So it's been great spending some time with them and their two dogs, one of which is brand new. I have not met the new dog before. She is very sweet, and it's been nice being able to, have a couple doggies in the house, although my cat's not super pumped about it. But it has been nice to have two dogs, just kind of roaming around, especially a puppy who is really well behaved, but, has their puppy moments of being a little silly and goofy. So it's been a nice little change of pace around here, and obviously always great seeing my parents. They've only been here for, not even as this recording, I think just one full day so far. So we haven't done too much as far as, going out and about. But we did go to Martin's Barbecue, which we always tend to do when family's in town, since it's nearby and we all love it. So no big surprise there that we went. And as usual, everything was great. Had a good time. We sat out in the little patio area with the dogs, and it was a little toasty out, even though they do a good job of trying to keep the temperatures down, but a little warm in there. But nonetheless, we still had a good time, and looking forward to whatever else we may do while they're visiting. And next week, my brother's family will be in. So that's my brother, sister-in-law, and my niece and nephew. And that's always an adventure, having the kids around. So can't wait. Lots of fun times with the family here in July in Charleston. And that is tough to beat. But that's about it going on here. So let's get into what is happening in the news. Businesses close in Charleston all the time. And it's usually the same stuff, even if they don't give an official reason. Staffing issues. They just didn't do the business they were hoping to do, and they had to close. Bills are piling up. We've seen that. Those are the two biggest ones we tend to hear. It's rare that it deviates outside of that. Sometimes a restaurateur or owner of a business just decides they're retiring or want to try something new, and so they're just calling it quits. It's rare that something bizarre happens, and this is one of the more bizarre closures I've seen in a while. And just because it doesn't seem like it's something that comes up a lot. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm talking about is the Aura Latin Club. Now, a lot of folks may not be familiar with that. It's new-ish, at least the name is. It's located, or I should say now was located, at 28 Ann Street in downtown Charleston. It's right between the Music Farm and the Brick, and it's attached to that parking garage right there on Ann Street. Even if you have never been inside, I'm sure you're familiar with that location. Prior to being called Aura, it was Deco, another nightclub, dance club type venue. And before that was Club Pantheon. For many, many years was Pantheon. I'm sure anyone who's spent time in Charleston, significant time in Charleston, or at least familiar with the name Pantheon, as that was a pretty popular and well-known spot before switching over to Deco and then Aura. So what exactly happened here? Well, city leaders decided to shut down the establishment in June due to what was called a pattern of activity that included all sorts of just nefarious behavior, and not necessarily the business. Some stuff is the business's fault. Some stuff had to do with their customers, and apparently the city thought that they weren't doing a good enough job controlling their customers in those situations. That included things like assaults and underage drinking. So again, underage drinking, that's going to be an issue with the venue itself. But again, if there's a disproportionate amount of calls coming through, to certain locations that can still fall in the business. They have to up their security. They have to do a better job of controlling their clients. So, but that's not it. It goes on from there. So there's an attorney by the name of Dahmen, who works for Clausen and Stobbs. They had a hand in getting this business shut down. They were the ones that said there was a pattern of activity that included assaults, that included underage drinking. Dolman represented the city of Charleston on this matter and said that over a year of problems with the establishment came to a head on January 27th of this year. So after having a year of all sorts of different issues, Doman is saying that on January 27th, one of the biggest issues occurred, which was apparently there was a fight between multiple people that were, that started to spill out of the club itself around closing time. And then when police tried to break up the fight, the guys who were fighting turned on the police and started assaulting them. And so, like I said, there were plenty of issues before that, according to these documents and statements from Doman, and which ultimately led to the closure of Aura Latin Club. And it's a permanent closure. They are not allowed to do business anymore in this area. So officially, the business license was revoked on June 14th, and this happened during a City of Charleston License Committee hearing. Now, the company that owns the business is called Ann Street Brand LLC. So they had the business license revoked, not just for Aura, but that means they're not supposed to be doing business under that name anymore. Now, Aura, as I mentioned, had replaced Deco back in September of 2023. It billed itself as the first and only Latin club in downtown Charleston. Now, according to a written decision and order from the hearing that I just mentioned, Aura was found to be conducting male strip shows on a regular basis, which is outside of what they are zoned for. So, just another kind of bizarre twist in this. Like, apparently, they were holding male strip shows, which they were not supposed to do because they are not zoned or approved for those types of shows. The document also stated that the committee received evidence showing multiple incidences of of assaults, disorderly conduct, drug charges, underage drinking, and public drunkenness. This came from incidents that happened in 2023 and 2024. Police testified at this hearing that a disproportionate amount of police activity was associated with that club specifically, and as a result, they were not able to devote as many resources to other people because the club was basically using up so many police resources. So other areas, other businesses were suffering. So that's why ultimately the business had to shut down. Now, according to Aura's Instagram page, they are now hosting events on the rooftop of Ink, which is another dance club type venue in downtown Charleston. It's on King Street, not too far away from where Aura was located. They are dubbing that area, Ink's rooftop, as the new rooftop Latin club. Now, how are they doing this? Well, Doman said he believes that they are operating under a different corporate name. So, although the same exact people who just had their business license revoked are involved, if they are not doing this business under that Ann Street brand that they have, then technically it's okay for them to do that. So, with that in mind, News 2, who is the only local news entity that I've seen to talk about this story, reached out to both Inc. and people behind the Ann Street brand, but they had no comment as of this recording of the podcast. So as I said, businesses close all the time, but this was one of the rare times I'm struggling to remember another business that this has happened to in this area, at least, where they were forced to shut down because of just multiple incidents that occurred at that venue. And this was a lot of different types too. It wasn't just like, hey, they've had a few fights here and there. It was apparently over a year period, just a disproportionate amount of fights, underage drinking incidents, hosting shows that they shouldn't be hosting because they're not zoned for them, disorderly conduct, just all sorts of stuff going on. And police in the city apparently said enough is enough. And so Aura Latin Dance Club, or the official name, I'm sorry, was Aura Latin Club. They are no more. At this time, obviously, it's still brand new. No word on what will happen with that space, if there's If it's going to be taken over by another similar business, something completely different. At this point, we just don't know what's going to happen. But definitely a headline I did not see coming this year was City Cites Unlawful Activity and Strip Shows for Dance Clubs Closure. Definitely did not have that on my bingo card, but that is indeed what has happened. With that, let's move on to the next story. Switching gears completely, we're going to go to the world of health and politics. As of next month, the Medical University of South Carolina, better known as MUSC, will no longer provide gender affirming care to any current or new patients, not just children, those under 18, but adults, anyone. No one will be able to get any gender affirming care at MUSC starting next month. The decision follows a new state law that we've talked about here on this podcast that prohibits transition procedures for all minors, which, there was already no minors in the state were having gender affirming surgery. However, they were getting other forms of care, whether that's just strictly therapy, whether that was therapy and, maybe puberty blockers by a certain age, hormone treatments, etc. Those types of things were happening with patients of different ages. But now those are no go under the new state law. Now, in addition to that, although we were told over and over and over and over again that this was all about protecting the children, it's all about the children. Adults can do whatever they want to their bodies, but children, we must protect them. Despite that, they added in that law a provision that said adult patients were no longer allowed to get care if they were going to be using public funds for their procedures. So if they were getting, Medicaid, Medicare, something like that, they were not able to get care anymore, which just shows that it was never about just the children anyway. But that should leave, you would think, adults who are not using public funds. They have their own insurance or they're just paying out of pocket, whatever it may be. But MUSC has decided to just shut it down completely. Now, ABC News 4 was one of the local entities covering this decision, and they said that people who supported the bill, which was dubbed the quote, help not harm bill, they said that the goal was always to protect children. But as I mentioned, MUSC has said it's stopping for all procedures, including for adults, and they're claiming it's because they're prohibited from performing any kind of transition procedures for patients of any age, which is not how many of us interpreted the law when we heard about it. Now, Dr. Annie Andrews, who is a pediatrician who used to work at MUSC and also ran against Nancy Mace in the most recent election, not this current one, obviously, she spoke to ABC News and said this is an overinterpretation of the law. She said that it boils down to the inappropriate infiltration of politics into our state's largest medical institution, that would be MUSC, and she said that there should be a wall there between politics and healthcare, to an extent, of course, and saying that we're members of the Freedom Caucus should not be telling doctors how to do their jobs. She also went on to say that children are not asking to be protected from their parents who are seeking this care with them or from their pediatricians who are assisting them. What they actually need is protection from the South Carolina Republican Party who pushed this agenda. Now, it was estimated in this piece that about 500 trans adults in the Low Country will now be faced with finding new care with obviously very limited options, especially in this state. So now 500 adults who shouldn't have been affected by this ruling are, because MUSC has decided to just shut it down completely. Officially, they'll stop seeing new trans patients after August 1st. However, all existing patients will be able to continue having care, but they'll start to cycle them out, maybe try to help them find new places to go. But so they'll still have some time. They'll have until the end of January 2025 before they officially can no longer get any kind of gender affirming care at MUSC. In a statement, MUSC says that they made this decision because they believe the new law prohibits physicians, mental health providers, or other healthcare professionals in South Carolina for knowingly providing gender transition procedures to a person under 18 years of age We knew that part. But they also believe that the law prohibits the use of public funds directly or indirectly for gender transition procedures. So, because MUSC health funds are public funds based on how they are set up, MUSC believes they are prohibited from providing gender transition services to all patients. So, the key there is they believe whether direct funds or indirect. So, versus like, a patient coming in and they have public funds, like I said, like a Medicare, Medicaid, that's pretty clear. Like we can't use those funds, but they believe because MUSC in general receives public funds, that they cannot provide gender affirming care for anyone, and that's what led them to make that decision. All right, obviously disappointing news. Certainly seems like Dr. Andrews said, like almost an over you know, reaction to the law, uh, just taking a very conservative look at what the law means and just deciding, well, let's just not do it. The way the law was presented doesn't seem the way that MUSC is interpreting it. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe they've got direction from lawyers that say, hey, the way this is worded, you can't provide this care at all. And if that's the case, okay, but it didn't seem that way when the law was passed. No one on either side of the aisle seemed to be thinking that's what the interpretation was. Local media, advocates, same thing. Now, there were certainly complaints about the law, but that was not one of them, that it seemed that MUSC would have to close down the entire department. Based on my own history with MUSC and how adverse they are to any negative news whatsoever, and how petrified they are of negative press, and how I've seen them, in my opinion, not always make the best decisions in certain areas as it relates to what's going on in the world, which relates to accusations against them. Um, just some of the things I saw, especially from 2020 on, a lot of times they are more concerned about bad press than anything else. And they're, how they're perceived, which, all businesses, of course, want to be perceived well. And make no mistake, hospitals in this country specifically are businesses. Um, and in this state, where it's a red state, and although the majority of people may not be against adults being able to do what they want, there's a feeling that that's what's happening here in this state. And to me, this is all speculation and opinion, my own. To me, it seems like they just decided, you know what? We can probably still do this and it's perfectly legal. But do we want the headache, the potential headache of activists protesting, saying things online about, what we are and what we're not doing? Do we really want all that, or can we just shut it down and we don't have to worry about, people saying we're, doing these things to children that we're not doing, making accusations against us? And do we really want all that? No, we don't. So let's just close it down. It looks like we might have an out here by claiming, because we receive public funds in some capacity, that could indirectly be considered public funds being used for gender transition treatments. And so let's just use that as a way to get out of this. Again, that's my opinion. I could be wrong. They really could have gotten advice from a lawyer, although that's not what the press statement that MUSC released. It wasn't like based on recommendations from lawyers or whatever. It was just, they just outright said, nope, this is the case. And it's just odd to me that if that was the case, activists specifically, but also media, probably would have been talking about this when it happened. And the fact that they didn't leads me to believe that MUSC can very, very well continue on providing care to adults who, again, have their own insurance that isn't using public funds, or just paying out of pocket. They very easily could. It's just shocking to me that everyone missed that this was going to be the case. So disappointing no matter what. But for me, it's disappointing because I thought better of MUSC. Although, like I said, based on my own personal history, especially since 2020, I shouldn't be particularly shocked that they were more worried about bad press, even though that bad press would be coming from a very vocal minority of people and not the majority of people who live in the state. They just didn't want that headache and just wanted to get away from anything even remotely controversial. And it's just very disappointing to see. Quick update from the Murdaugh murder trials. I'm not going to run down the whole Alec Murdaugh saga. I'm sure you're all well aware of it at this point. But just a quick update: attorneys for the convicted murderer, and we've also now know officially a financial fraudster, as the state newspaper called him, Alec Murdaugh. And his attorneys are asking the South Carolina Supreme Court to review a judge's decision last winter that ended Murdaugh's bid to get a new trial on his murder charges based on alleged jury tampering by Colleton County's Becky Hill. So it is not known how quickly the Supreme Court will rule on this. Who knows? It seems like it probably won't lead to a new trial, but honestly, who knows? But anyway, this all stems from something that happened in January. There was a hearing where Circuit Court Judge Judge Toal heard allegations of this jury tampering by Hill, but ended up ruling there was insufficient evidence to grant Murdaugh a new trial. So he and his attorneys are appealing to the state Supreme Court, hoping that they'll have a different interpretation and will let a retrial potentially happen. So I'll be sure to keep you up to date on anything that happens there. And lastly, a new mandate is now in place across South Carolina that restricts, which books can be on the shelves in public libraries. If libraries fail to comply with this new rule, the consequences could be quite severe. They could lose state funding, which many say is 100% necessary for them to stay operational. So the temporary law was written into the state budget. It's called the proviso, and it requires county libraries to certify to the state library that their children's section does not contain any books or materials that appeal to the prurient interest. What does that exactly mean? Well, defined in the state code, and bear with me on this, that is defined as, quote, a shameful or morbid interest in nudity, sex, or excretion, and it's reflective of an arousal of lewd and lascivious desires and thoughts, end quote. Specifically, that is replying to kids under the age of 13. Now, did that sound like a bunch of gobbledygook? Yes, of course it did. It even sounds like it's coming out from, some long ago era, the way that is worded, just reflecting how book bans and things are quite archaic. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not to say I think any and all material should be available for anyone of any age. But we know how these book bans work. They claim it's for the most extreme of things, which the vast majority of the public is like, oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. But then ultimately, things that really shouldn't fall under that umbrella kind of creep in as people push their own, their own personal political or religious agendas. And the wording is confusing on purpose, I would venture to say. Again, my opinion, but I would imagine that wording is meant to be confusing, so it's can be kind of twisted and molded however an individual person wants it to be to fit, again, their own personal agendas. So, if those books are in their library, that's perfectly fine. They can still have any books that might go against this mandate as far as that definition. They just have to make sure that those books are not in the children's section, and that the only way a child could take it out is with parental permission. So, on the plus side, if there is something that gets ruled inappropriate that maybe shouldn't be, parents can still go with their child and let them take out that book. On the negative side, of course, if there's something that really shouldn't be banned and is, that children should be able of certain ages should be able to take out, they wouldn't be able to do it. And we've seen this before. There's an attack on LGBTQ materials specifically, and they don't even have to be quote unquote pornographic or sexually explicit. People will twist a definition to make anything that falls under, queer culture is inappropriate. And so kids who grow up questioning, unsure what they are, maybe they do know what they are, but they don't trust their parents. They're not sure if they can come out to their parents yet, or whoever. Sometimes some of these books and materials that they take out help them in that process and make them feel better about themselves and show them that there's other people out there like them and how to navigate situations. And when people take those away, you're harming children. Now, again, that's not to say if there is something with, that is inappropriate for children that should be available. But just being a book about the LGBTQ community doesn't make it inappropriate by default. And that's the problem here, is how people will twist these things and take away materials from children that really shouldn't be. With that in mind, library directors have spoken out about this restriction, calling it a solution to a problem that does not exist, mainly because, as Angela Craig, who is president of the South Carolina Library Association and the executive director of the Charleston County Public Library, she said that these policies are already in place. They already have policies that address these concerns. So nothing is really changing in that sense, but they are worried, like I am, that because there's now this mandate, things can be twisted in a way where things that shouldn't be falling under this category are. Craig also said that the statewide rule undermines local control over library policies, which are set by the local library board, whose members are selected by the county council. So, if a community as a whole determines that something is inappropriate, that's their call. But what is inappropriate for X county in the Midlands or upstate of South Carolina might not be viewed as inappropriate down here in the Low Country in Charleston County. Many believe each county, each city who has their own dedicated boards should be able to make their own decisions. And this takes that away. It makes it a statewide policy instead. And so that, of course, is the biggest concern right now from the folks who actually work in the libraries. But just like the book bans in schools, just like the ban on gender affirming care, our state legislature doesn't care what the people who actually work in these fields think. They don't care what experts in these fields think. They don't care about what students, children, LGBTQ, specifically trans people think. They decided long ago that they know better than experts. They know better than you. They know better than me. And what they know and what they believe is what everyone should believe. And we're seeing that just in this podcast show alone, how their tentacles are all over the place. They're in schools, they're in libraries, they're in our hospitals. And for a state that is red, and red being Republican controlled, a group that says they care about small government. They don't want government in making decisions of every aspect of your life. They think there should be less government in your lives. Well, they sure are putting a heck of a lot of government in very personal places in people's lives. The doctor's room, and this also applies to women, of course, as we had the abortion ban. They're in our hospitals, they're in our school libraries, they're in our public libraries. I mean, doesn't sound very small government-y to me, does it? That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you have an amazing weekend. If you need plans, go to holycitycenter.com/calendar. I will be back on Monday. We have an interview planned, barring any changes in schedule. We will have an interview on Monday that you will not want to miss. It's going to be very interesting. I'm excited to speak to the guest, but that's all I'm going to say for now, just in case there's some scheduling issues. But the plan is for Monday's show to be an interview, and you're not going to want to miss it. It should be very entertaining and insightful. Thank you again for listening. Also have to say thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And also a big thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. As I said, I'll be back on Monday, so have a great weekend. Until I return on Monday, good night. Good luck.